Don't come to the graduation, Dad. I mean it. Just send the money for the dinner after. That was the text. No comma after Dad. No period at the end, like even basic punctuation was too much effort when talking to me. I read it 3 times standing in my driveway, engine grease still under my fingernails from the afternoon shift, the June heat coming off the asphalt in waves. I set the phone face down on the hood of the old Silverado and stood there a moment, listening to the neighborhood quiet down around me. My son was graduating from Harwick University in 11 days, 4 years. A degree in business administration, the first in our family to finish college. And he was asking me not to come. I picked the phone back up and typed, "Okay, son." Then I went inside, washed my hands at the kitchen sink, and made myself a ham sandwich. I ate it standing at the counter because the table still had my wife Carol's sewing things spread across it, the way she'd left them 3 years ago when she went to the hospital and never came back. I hadn't moved any of it. I don't know why. Maybe I just wasn't ready. I'll tell you something about myself that my son seemed to have forgotten somewhere between his sophomore and junior years. I am 63 years old. I have owned and operated Briggs Auto and Transmission on Route 9 inches, Clement, Ohio, for 31 years. I started it with $11,000 I'd saved working double shifts at a dealership in Columbus, sleeping on a pull-out couch in my brother-in-law's basement for 14 months so I could keep every dollar I earned. I built that shop from 2 bays and a used lift to 12 bays, 4 certified mechanics on staff, and a commercial fleet contract with the county that Carol and I celebrated with a bottle of sparkling cider because neither of us drank. I am not a wealthy man in the way people on television are wealthy, but I am not poor. I never was. I just looked poor to people who'd stopped paying attention. My son, Marcus, was 22. He was sharp. Genuinely sharp, the kind of mind that could hold a whole argument in his head and turn it like a stone, examine every facet. I'd watched that mind develop since he was 4 years old, pulling apart a broken alarm clock on the kitchen floor to see what was inside. I had been proud of it every single day. I paid for Harwick, all of it, every semester, because Carol had wanted him to go somewhere real, somewhere that would open doors, and I had promised her he would. Tuition, housing, meal plan, the laptop he needed freshman year, the car junior year when he said the bus schedule made it impossible to get to his internship on time. I hadn't complained about any of it. That's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because the text wasn't the first time. It was just the first time he put it in writing. The previous Thanksgiving, he'd brought home a girl named Priya, lovely young woman, very poised. Her family was from outside Philadelphia. They were all having dinner and she'd asked me, politely, what I did for work. Before I could answer, Marcus said, "He runs a small garage," and changed the subject. Not untrue, but the way he said small, leaning on it just slightly, the way you lean on a word when you want it to do quiet work, I heard it. Priya was gracious and moved on. I put another spoonful of green beans on my plate and let it go. Christmas. He'd asked me not to wear my Briggs Auto jacket to his friend's holiday party because, quote, "It's going to be a nice crowd, Dad. You know how it is." I wore a plain navy sweater instead. I stood in somebody's living room for 2 hours holding a glass of eggnog while Marcus laughed too loudly across the room, showing a version of himself that didn't include me. A performance. I recognized it because I'd seen Carol do a version of it at her office parties, except when Carol did it, she'd catch my eye from across the room and give me a small, private smile that said, "I see you. You're mine. Don't go anywhere." Marcus didn't look across the room. Not once. After Carol died, I think something loosened in him, something that had kept him tethered to who we were. I don't blame grief for it entirely. Grief is real, and it makes people do strange things. But at a certain point, grief becomes a permission slip, and I watched my son use it to become someone I wasn't sure I recognized. The night I got the text, I sat in the living room for a long time with the television off. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would say. She would probably say Marcus is 22 and 22-year-olds are stupid, and then she would say, but don't let him get away with it. And then she would make coffee, and we would figure out what to do. I figured out what to do without the coffee. Here is something about Harwick University's payment system that I knew and my son did not. The final semester tuition installment, the last payment of the year, due May 15th, I had set up as a manual payment rather than auto draft. I'd done it that way since freshman year because I wanted to keep eyes on what was being charged. Every May, I received a paper invoice. I reviewed it, and I sent a certified check. It was old-fashioned, and my accountant had told me twice to just put it on auto-pay. But I never did. It was a habit. My name was on the account. My son had never asked about the particulars of how his education was being funded. He just knew that it was. The invoice for the final installment was sitting on my desk. $14,260. I looked at it for a long while. Then I filed it in the drawer and left it there. I want to be clear about something, because I've thought about this carefully in the years since. I was not acting out of rage. Rage is hot and I was cold. The kind of cold that comes after a long time of small hurts, accumulating the way sediment accumulates at the bottom of a river, invisible until one day the water runs shallow and you can see what's been building. I was not trying to humiliate my son. That was never the goal. The goal, if I'm honest, was simpler and older than any plan for revenge. I wanted him to feel the shape of what he'd been leaning on. I wanted him to understand, in some concrete and undeniable way, that the floor beneath him had a name, and the name was mine, and I had built it with my hands. I went to work the next morning, told my lead mechanic, Dennis, that I'd be taking a few days off around graduation weekend. He asked if I was going to watch my son walk. I said I hadn't decided yet. Dennis, who has worked for me for 19 years and knows me better than most people, looked at me for a beat and then went back to the engine he was pulling. He didn't ask anything else. I called the university's student accounts office on a Tuesday afternoon from my truck in the parking lot of the hardware store. I explained that I was the account holder, that the final installment for Marcus Briggs's account had not yet been submitted, and I asked what the implications would be if the balance was not cleared before commencement. The woman on the phone, patient and professional, explained it to me clearly. An outstanding balance would flag the account. The diploma would be held. The student's name would not be read at the ceremony. They would not be permitted to cross the stage. I thanked her. I told her I would be in touch about payment. I hung up and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes watching a family load bags of mulch into a minivan. Then I went in and bought the weather stripping I'd come for. I did not attend the graduation ceremony. I want to say that plainly. I gave him what he asked for. I didn't show up. What I did do, on the morning of June 8th, was drive down to Carol's grave and sit there for a while in the early quiet before the groundskeepers arrived. The cemetery is outside of town, backed up against a tree line, and in early June the light comes in low and gold through the oaks. I brought her tulips because she'd always liked them better than roses. Roses are for people trying too hard, she used to say, which I always thought was funny because she was the most romantic person I'd ever known. I talked to her for a while. Not out loud, mostly. But I told her about the text, and about the invoice in the drawer, and about the way Marcus had said small garage at Thanksgiving with Priya sitting right there. I told her I was trying to do right by her promise, but I wasn't sure what doing right looked like anymore. The oaks were very still. I stayed until the groundskeeper's truck came down the lane, and then I drove home. I found out what happened at the ceremony from my nephew, Daryl, who had driven down from Cleveland to watch his cousin graduate. Daryl is 34. The son of my younger brother Ray, and he has always been fond of Marcus in a low-key, non-effusive way, the kind of fondness that doesn't require performance. He called me that evening. "Uncle Cliff," he said. And then he was quiet for a moment in a way that told me he was being careful. "Tell me," I said. Daryl told me. He'd been sitting in the fourth row on the left side of the arena, next to Priya's parents, who had driven up from outside Philadelphia. There were perhaps 3,000 people in the arena. The business school was called first. Names alphabetically. When they reached the B's, Marcus stood up from his seat with the other graduates in his row, cap slightly crooked the way his caps had always been crooked since he was a kid, and he walked toward the stage stairs. And then one of the faculty marshals stepped up beside him, very quietly, and said something close to his ear. And Marcus stopped, and the line kept moving, and his name was not called. He stood at the side of the stage for several seconds. Daryl said he couldn't see Marcus's face from where he was sitting, but he could see the way his body went very still, the way a person goes still when they receive news that the brain has not yet processed. Then Marcus stepped back from the stage and went to find a seat in the chairs along the wall reserved for faculty. Priya's mother leaned over to Daryl and asked quietly if something had happened. Daryl said he didn't know. After the ceremony, Marcus found out from the student accounts office what was waiting for him. A flag on his account, an outstanding balance of $14,260, and a diploma that would be mailed or released in person only upon full payment. His degree was complete. He had earned it. The grades were his. The work was his. 4 years of genuine effort were entirely and irrevocably his. But the piece of paper had my name on the bill. Daryl said that by the time the post-ceremony dinner started at the restaurant Marcus had reserved, things were very tense. Priya's family had been gracious and diplomatic, which probably made it worse. There were toasts that felt a little hollow. Marcus kept checking his phone. At some point, he stepped outside and called me. I was on my front porch. The evening was warm. The fireflies were just starting up along the back fence, and I had a glass of sweet tea. When I saw his name on the screen, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, but something older and sadder. Something like the feeling you get when you've proven a point you wished you hadn't needed to prove. I answered, "Dad." His voice was tight, controlled, the way he got when he was trying not to sound the way he felt. "Marcus," I said, "the university says there's an unpaid balance on my account." "I know," I said. Silence. The fireflies blinked. "Why?" he said. Not a question, really. More like a word he needed to place somewhere. "You told me not to come," I said. "I respected that. I stayed away. I gave you what you asked for." Another silence. Longer. I heard noise from the restaurant in the background, the murmur of a party that had lost its footing. "Dad, that's not the same thing, isn't it?" I said. "You told me my presence was embarrassing, so I removed my presence. All of it. I have to give Priya's family an explanation. There were people there. People who—" "I know," I said again. "Dad, this is you, can't just—" "Marcus." I kept my voice even. Not cold, not angry. Even. The way a road is even. "I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. Your mother and I built something for 31 years. I worked 7 days a week for the first 11 years of that shop. I missed things. I know I missed things. Your mother was the one at the school plays and the science fairs, and I am not excusing that. I am just telling you the true shape of what happened. And everything we built for you. The tuition, the housing, the car, all of it. Not because we wanted you to owe us. Not because we needed you to make us feel important. Because we loved you. And love does things with its hands." He was quiet. "But you have spent the last 2 years making me feel like something you found on the bottom of your shoe," I said. "Small garage. Don't wear that jacket. Don't come to the ceremony. Just send the check." I paused. "I'm not a check, son. I am your father." I heard him exhale. It was a ragged sound. "I need the balance cleared," he said. His voice had dropped. "The diploma." "I know you do," I said. "And I will pay it. Because I promised your mother I would see your education through, and I keep my promises. I'll call student accounts Monday morning and arrange the payment." "Monday, Dad. The dinner is tonight. People are. The diploma will come," I said. "You've earned it. Nobody can take the degree from you. But tonight is going to feel the way it feels, and I think that's something you needed to feel." I heard him breathe. "I know you're angry," I said. "You have the right to be angry. And when you're done being angry, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. I am 63 years old, and I have nowhere else to be, and nobody else to be it for. When you're ready to talk, I'll be on this porch." I didn't wait for him to respond. I said, "Good night, Marcus," and I hung up. The fireflies were thick along the back fence now, the way they get on warm June nights in Ohio, little lights blinking in and out of existence like thoughts you almost have. I sat with my sweet tea, and I let myself feel what I felt, which was not triumph and was not satisfaction. It was grief, mostly. The particular grief of loving someone who has looked at you and found you lacking. The grief of watching your child become someone who moves through the world as if the floor appeared under his feet by magic, as if the walls were always there, as if light came on in rooms because light simply appears in rooms, and not because someone 30 years ago ran wire through the joists with split and bleeding knuckles. I thought about what I might have done differently. This is the part I don't skip because I think it's important. I thought about whether I had given him too much, whether I had insulated him so thoroughly from the experience of building something that he'd lost the ability to understand what building costs. Carol and I had talked about this. She'd worried about it, actually. When he was in high school, and I'd told her he'd figure it out. I said, "He's a smart kid. He'll figure it out. Maybe smart isn't enough on its own. Maybe smart without the knowledge of what things cost is just a faster way to make bigger mistakes. I don't know. I am not a man who has always made the right decisions, and I am not going to pretend to be one here. I can tell you what I did and why, and I can tell you that I meant it when I said the diploma would be paid for, and I did pay for it, called student accounts the following Monday morning as promised, cleared the balance, confirmed the diploma would be processed and mailed within 2 weeks. What I cannot tell you is that the dinner that night was fine, because it wasn't. Daryl called me again the next morning and said it had been a difficult evening. Priya had been kind to Marcus, which Daryl said probably helped. Her father had shaken Marcus's hand and said something quietly to him that Daryl hadn't caught. I was glad she was there. I had never met Priya properly, only that Thanksgiving, but she'd seemed like a person with a clear head and a good heart, and I hoped she was the kind of person who would ask Marcus the right questions in the days ahead. 3 weeks passed. June moved into July. The shop was busy. Summer is always busy. People taking road trips, AC systems failing, tires wearing thin. I worked. I ate. I talked to Carol on Sundays at the cemetery, which I know sounds eccentric, but which has become one of the fixed points of my week, one of the things that keeps me oriented. On a Saturday morning in the middle of July, I was in the garage at home replacing the front brake pads on the Silverado, because even when you own a shop, you do certain things yourself out of habit, and because you can, when I heard a car come up the driveway. I came around the side of the house and Marcus was standing beside his car. He was in jeans and a plain t-shirt, and he looked, I thought, thinner than the last time I'd seen him at Christmas. He also looked, I thought, a little older. Not in a bad way. In the way that comes after something has happened to you. He had a bakery bag in his hand. He held it up slightly, an offering or a gesture, and said, "I didn't know what to bring." "You didn't have to bring anything," I said. Daryl said, "You like the cinnamon rolls from Baker's on 5th. Daryl talks too much," I said. "Come inside." We sat at the kitchen table. I moved some of Carol's sewing things to make room, not moving them away, just to the side, and for the first time that felt okay, like making room, not erasing. Marcus looked at the fabric and thread, and I saw something move across his face, quiet and private, and neither of us spoke about it. He told me about the diploma arriving in the mail. He told me about Priya, that they were serious, that her family had been kind to him. He told me about the job offer he'd received from a logistics firm in Cincinnati. A good offer, a real one, the kind with a salary and a future. He was going to take it. He seemed genuinely pleased about it in a way that was different from the performed enthusiasm I'd seen in him over the past 2 years. This was quieter. It sounded more like his real voice. Then he was quiet for a little while, looking at the coffee I'd put in front of him. "I've been thinking about something you said," he told me. "On the phone that night." "Which part?" I said. "Love does things with its hands." He looked up. "I keep coming back to it." I didn't say anything. "I didn't understand what it cost," he said. "I mean, I knew, on some level. Numbers, tuition. I knew what the numbers were, but I didn't understand what it cost. Does that make sense?" "It does," I said. "I was ashamed of you," he said, and he said it directly, looking at me, which I respected. I want to say that out loud because I don't. I want to be honest about it. I was ashamed of the shop, and the truck, and the jacket, and I was ashamed of myself for being ashamed of you. And I handled it in the worst possible way, which was to take it out on you. And I'm sorry. He'd said sorry to me before in his life, when he was 8 and broke the garage window with a baseball, when he was 16 and took the car without asking. Those were boyhood apologies, quick and functional. This one was different. This one had weight behind it. I could hear that he'd carried it for 3 weeks before sitting down across from me and saying it out loud. I hear you, I said. Are you? He paused. Are you okay? I mean, I should ask that. Are you okay? Alone out here. It caught me off guard, not because it was an unusual question, but because I had not been expecting it. I thought about it honestly for a moment. Some days are harder than others, I said. I talk to your mother on Sundays. I know how that sounds. Daryl told me, Marcus said. I think that sounds like you. I looked at my son, 22 years old, sitting at the kitchen table where he'd done his homework for 12 years, where his mother had made pancakes on Saturday mornings, where we had been a family, the three of us, before things changed and then changed again. He looked like himself, maybe more himself than he had in 2 years. I thought about all the ways a person can be lost and found and lost again, and how most of the time the finding doesn't come with a clean moment of recognition. It's just a morning when they show up with bakery bag and look like the person you've known since before they were born. I'm glad you came, I said. I should have come sooner, he said. You're here now, I said. We ate the cinnamon rolls. They were good, the way Baker's always is. That particular sweetness that is exactly enough and not too much. I told Marcus about a 1968 Mustang that had come into the shop the week before, belonged to a retired school teacher in Bexley who'd kept it in a barn for 20 years and finally decided to restore it. I told him about the engine, about what it needed, about the sound it made when Dennis turned it over for the first time. A sound like something coming back from a long way away. Marcus listened. He asked questions, real questions, the interested kind. Outside, the July light was doing what July light does in Ohio, broad and generous, falling across Carol's garden, which I have kept going in a rough and approximate way since she died because she would have minded if I'd let it go. The roses were doing well this year, actually, which she would have found very funny. Roses, she always said, are for people trying too hard. But they grow the way they grow, and I stopped arguing with them. I thought about what I would have told Carol later, if she'd been there to ask how it went. I would have told her what I always tell her. I'm figuring it out. I'm still here. I'm trying to do right by the promises I made when I made them. The afternoon sat easy around us. My son and I, at the kitchen table, in the house we both knew, in the life that had always been there, underneath the version of events, where I was a small garage, and he was something larger and grander and untethered from where he came from. Untethered, it turns out, is not a destination. It is just a way of falling that takes a while to notice. He stayed for dinner. I made chili, Carol's recipe, which I know well enough now that I don't need the card. We ate and talked about the Cincinnati job, and about Priya, and about whether he should get a truck or if a car made more sense given city parking, and I told him my opinion on the matter, which he listened to without dismissing, and which felt like something new and ordinary and good. When he left, it was past 9 o'clock, and the fireflies were up again along the back fence. He hugged me in the driveway, a real hug, one that lasted the right length, and then he got in his car. I stood in the driveway and watched the taillights go down the road and around the bend. Then I went inside and washed the bowls and stood at the kitchen sink a moment in the quiet. He came back, I said, to the kitchen, to the sewing things on the table, to the 31 years on the walls. I dried my hands and turned off the light.